what we're doing is we're talking about the pathology group stuff right now, and I think that's a very good way of doing it. And then from there, everybody can fill in their parts. And so when you read material, what I would do, and you read stuff, I would just take notes into that, start making bullet points, and then you can always edit it in your
Yeah.
section. You're gonna create
Yeah.
your own section. You have the
Yeah.
question,
We
right?
have.
You
We
can
have our
start
names.
building. It's like you're building a house, kind of, you're building it. So first you go through some website, you extract some bullet point pieces that or you want to talk about, and then you go look into Google and you look for some pictures and you add the pictures to the mix. And then all of a sudden you have something that's created, that you can teach from and describe to the students or to the viewer differently or more directly than if you just copy paste some text. For example, if you could build it that way, that's what I would do. I would read material websites, and then I wouldn't copy paste the text out of that into some document. I would just all of a sudden go with the highlighter and just put in the highlighted words into this myself, and then start building it from there.
Right. No, that's
Have
what
the
we're
main
doing.
visualize it.
Yeah, yeah. We're also using Google Docs so we can write everything, all the information, so that we can move it here. So that like we won't
That's
miss
good.
the page. Yeah.
So you got, like, we often call that in making classes, we call it, like, I have a sandbox.
Yeah.
Or some classes, I think Merritt calls it. I'm not sure. But it's like you can have a sandbox where you can play around, and then you create, and then you copy over what that's also very good.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good
All right,
job.
I'll stop sharing this right now.
Okay. Yeah, I got to do more of that. Go through that this week too. All right. So let's see. Are we getting anybody else coming in? Ta-da, da-da-da.
I think it's just our group.
All right.
Hey, that's fine with me. I don't have a problem with that. If you guys want to keep talking group material stuff, go ahead. If you have any questions about what you've been doing so far, because I am going to actually connect with every group on Zoom this semester, and also individually if necessary, so I can help you, hold your hand, sort of help you with that a little bit if necessary. Not everybody has that need, but a lot of them is helpful to fill in some of the gaps that we haven't developed yet as skills. So where are you guys with that stuff? What are you doing right now?
Still research since I just figured out how to do the download. Thank you, Pujan, for that.
Okay.
But,
and how is that going?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, I think it's okay. I mean, I live it, so I have to know it, right?
Well, that's true. Are you and what about the others? You finding stuff that is interesting, or you having like frustrations with it?
No, it is really interesting, but also like surprising how many people have diabetes and people are not even aware of it.
Yes.
Like this, like understanding like the healthcare system here, and people, not everyone have access to the doctor to see that they are like pre-diabetes, and like the number of people that have diabetes, and I don't know, like it will be interesting to look into like pharma company, but that's not our like presentation. But yeah, I mean that's not our assignment.
No, it's a very
business
perspective, I think, of like how messed up the system is.
No, that's a very good perspective, because I just went to Kaiser this morning for my blood draw to check my A1C. And the technician had said, oh, I know a lot of people at Kaiser who are in the system and they refuse to take medication. It's all lifestyle changes for them. Something. Wow, I need a little help, so I'm taking the meds.
Well, there's one study that I think I shared in some of my texts, was that Colombia that said, if you get up every half hour and walk for 5 minutes, your blood sugar goes down 40%.
Oh, wow.
So there's stuff that are like, there's like, it's cool, because that, to me, that's like, that's a trickery bag. Like that's like your things in your backpack you want to know to do that don't really cost you much headache. at the end of the day, you know, and those are sort of the third question kind of component, because yeah, the system is very, very, I was listening to Bill Maher on HBO real time. I did some political stuff, but he was talking about, you know, the diabetes industrial complex, you know, because they were talking about Ozempic and how that's going to lower, because they're, you know, obviously they don't know long term, they don't know what really the mechanism is. I think it's, you know, danger material to me. I stopped drinking alcohol 3 months ago. I started walking. I'm now about 5.5 miles with my dog on average last 90 days. I dropped about 25 pounds. And I'm for me it's okay, because I mean it might not be as easy for others, because I am already a rabbit eater and eat mostly salads. Besides, you know, I don't have a sweet tooth I try to move that away over the years, but those things really do a lot, you know. And then, but the system just gives you the medicine. Diabetes is a perfect example of how much we can do to change on our end, but the system doesn't talk about that. You know, throughout your life,
from it.
They don't tell you the sugar connection with the diabetes, and then later on it's the dementia. That's the next one. You know, you got to go there too with that.
Yeah. And I think like the behavior, other side, it's like changing a behavior is so hard for people. So it's not only the system, but just behavior. Like, you know, like taking a 10 minutes walk when you don't have diabetes. That sounds like a lot. And yeah.
Right. And that's
so how do you health educate people about it? And a lot of people don't even have access to, like, you know, healthier food options, and don't have education to nutrition. So it's like a lot of factors, I feel like.
Well, and that's the thing, you know, education, if we can increase the education, that's first. If we increase the education, we increase the awareness, a lot of people then start putting some dots together on their own. But yeah, not everybody, because that's also why the system is so lethargic, is because it's based on pleasing the patient, and then the patient can't be pleased anymore. I remember one of my doctor patients, she was telling me she did a residency in Louisiana area or something, and she's like, she was working for the cardiology unit, and underneath it was a fried chicken place. Yeah. It's like where are the connections? You know, it's very difficult to to teach it, but then go into that behavioral thing, because we use food so much for nurturing,
right?
You know, and what's interesting is we are actually, our soul food is what our moms had as their soul food when they were pregnant with you. That then becomes our primal brain imprint of what makes us nurtured. So it's extremely important. You know, that's also why it's so important. That's where I have a hard time with the nutrition classes alone that count calories and stuff, versus what we're going to do at the end, a nutrition journal where you write down, how did you feel today? What did you eat today? What company were you with when you were eating? You know, and more looks at those types of emotional aspects, because eating is so tied to that. You know, it's very interesting. Yeah. No, you guys are doing great work. I'm really glad that you guys are doing the diabetes. Good. So with that, so if you don't have any hang-ups, what about then you start doing the Canva, and then what's next after that? If you have any questions, I think you just reach out. That's what's next for your group now. Then I know you guys are on the right track, and I can sort of let you loose and hear from you. Otherwise, I'm gonna just sort of, because the next step is that I see some presentation type stuff, right? In some ways, when you have sort of a little draft, and generally the first draft goes back with put some pictures in it, not just text. But I think you guys are on the right track with that, especially if you're using Canva, because it's more focuses on the visual. Then that's the next step. And then after that, we want to talk about, do you guys want to do a video, or do you guys want to come in the classroom and we'll present it in the classroom?
We can talk about it. And see what we will talk about it and see what works the best, I think.
Exactly. No, that you can see about that, because I think those are the choices I want to give this semester a bit more readily, to give people also the choice to come to the classroom. So then that's that. And so do you guys let's go then to the weekly type thing, since we're already now discussed the pathology program and project, and we're clear, no class tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so that no in-person stuff tonight. And so then from there, I think we can go into this week's material, if you don't have anything else going on. Now let me see how I can manipulate this thing and make this big. All right, can you see that?
Yeah.
And I can move me out of the way, see, and I can say, oh, look, I have to go the opposite way. It's like the weather person, it's really strange. And why is this not quite enhance fade? Yeah, that's transparent enough. It's probably too big, because I don't really need to point to anything on this stuff, I don't think. Because the endocrine system, I think, is fairly straightforward. So we what did we just do? The immune system, right?
Yeah.
And in the immune system, we learned a lot about what defenses we have, what sort of independently can get rid of stuff, and then the endocrine system, and then the brain nervous system sort of is these are the communication systems that we're now going into. And so we have two ways of communicating between sort of the brain mostly, but also with the endocrine system, just sort of internally has mechanisms that bypass the brain. They are like more based on that negative feedback loop that we're going to touch on again, that we learned in the first chapter. And so the endocrine system, as the nervous system, controls and coordinates, and you see that up. Oh, look, it's now I want to point to it. Is there a pointer for this thing? That's all right. I don't have to worry about that right now. I'm learning this new program. But the endocrine system and the nervous system control and coordinate the body functions. So that's your first thing that you're thinking when you're thinking of these two systems. The nervous system, we know about that. When you like hit your funny bone and it goes down to your pinky and shoots down, nerves are firing. That's electricity. And you can feel that very often. Or you need to react so you don't fall down and want to swerve out of a pothole, or need to swerve on a freeway. That fast reaction, that's a nervous system reaction. And we kind of understand that, I think, intuitively, a lot of us already. But the endocrine system is a similar system, but it works slower. And it works through the blood system. And so we have all these chemicals that get secreted in one part of the body, like in a gland, and then they get put into the bloodstream and go to the different organs and get put and go into those cells, or attach themselves to certain cells in those organs, and then those organs have a reaction to that. And so that's how they control and coordinate the functions of the cells. And so that's an interesting process. We talked before, the vascular system is kind of the freeway system that we have, that we can transport things around the body. The thing is, it's a little bit slow. So if you got to like swerve out of the freeway away from another car, you got a little bit trouble with that slowness, having to trickle some swerving out energy. So that's a nervous system. The nervous system is based on electricity. That's faster. But a lot of the process we don't need to do fast, like growing. We don't need to grow fast. We can grow very slow and deliberate. And so we can adjust of how things goes and fine tune it. And so that's more what the endocrine system can cover, things like that. Or for example, the system that I just brought up, which is swerving out on the freeway, away from other cars if something is dangerous, or so. The quickness is the nervous system, and then if it's really bad and a half a minute later you get the jitters, then the jitters is actually the adrenaline going into your system, and that's actually the endocrine system. So it's an interesting place, because you see sort of how slow the endocrine system moves into the body if it has to really rush itself. It's an adrenaline rush is doing that. When we look at the anatomy of the endocrine system, we look at different glands, we look at different structures, organs in the body and different parts of the body that secrete hormones, and the hormones are chemicals that then go through the system, the blood system, and then they attach themselves to receptors on cell surfaces that can read those. It becomes a shape question always when you think about receptors and hormones and things like that. It's always about real physical three-dimensional shapes when we bring it down to a molecular level. So it's kind of interesting, actually. But then those receptors on the surface of the cell, they create a reaction inside the cell. We have some hormones that go directly into the cell and do that right on the nucleus. They don't have to go on the surface of the cell and talk to the cell, but most of them, the water-based ones compared to the fat-based ones, that's a discussion, that's a fundamental discussion. Anything that's oil-based, fat-based can go straight into a cell. Anything that's water-based, hydrophilic, has to stop at the boundary of the phospholipid bilayer and can penetrate, and so has to just talk to things on the outside. That's sort of a chapter 2 chemical chapter question in case you need to go back and refresh a little bit. But then from there, then the body has a reaction, and very often these reactions are things like growing, or things like giving you energy and making ATP out of sugar, getting the sugar into the cells, things like that. And we can briefly touch on them. But basically, I need you just to, in this system, and you look at the test review, at the end of the day, you want to know which gland does what inside the body. What else do we need to talk about? Oh, we need to differentiate the endocrine system from the exocrine glands, or the endocrine glands from the exocrine glands. The endocrine glands are the ones we're talking about in this chapter, and the exocrine glands come from the word exit, and so the substances that we secrete in those exit the body, and that's mostly the sweat glands that we're talking about there, or the sebaceous glands, which are the ones that we're touching on in the next chapter, that are sort of making our hair oily kind of things, those glands. Yeah, question?
No question. I'm just like wondering, like, for example, if you are like growing up in like low-income country and don't have enough nutrient,
yeah,
how does that affect this, like with growth and brain development?
No, that's well, no, those are very important questions. I mean, you do have challenges. For example, when you're looking at the gland, so let me these are just talking of fundamentals that I sort of try to touch base on, which is probably a little confusing, but when we look at not the pituitary, but the gland in the front of the throat, this one, the thyroid gland in the front of the throat, this gland needs iodine to function, or this hormone needs iodine to properly function. And one of the problems in places, in actually places where there's not enough iodine around, is then that it influences the brain, and it makes people not be as smart, and be sort of hindered in that capacity. It also hinders their growth. And they've shown that, and then probably something else. And they also creates a goiter, creates a structure here as well. And then and that's because the body can't absorb the iodine that's not there anymore. And the gland thinks, well, we don't have a positive reaction to what we want to accomplish. That negative feedback loop. So it doesn't accomplish that. It doesn't create that metabolism difference that it wants to do. And so what it does, it creates more and more and more of the hormone, thinking it's going to accomplish it if it creates more substance. But it can't do it because it doesn't have the iodine. And so it creates that bad cycle, and that is the deficiency then, basically. And so what they did is they put iodine into the salt. And it's interesting too, they did that in different cultures during different times, because I was reading about how they did it in Switzerland, and then I was reading about how they did it up here in America. I think it was Ohio or somewhere, Wisconsin or so, where they actually started putting that in, because it's a very, because for a long time the researchers and the medicals thought it's because it's toxic. Iodine is toxic, and so they put too much in to whatever they gave in supplements or form in water or so, and then the people got sick or died. And then they backed off of that, and then somebody came up with the idea that maybe you just need to put in very little and give very little, and then that worked. And so that was an interesting sort of process that way. But sorry, that's a long answer to sort of your question.
No, it makes sense. I think just coming from like public health background, like I know that like in certain culture, people were refusing to like take salt with iodine. And because they thought that the government is trying to control them by like, you know, it's like a way of doing like family planning and all that. Like it's just like a misinformation. So people were like refusing to take it rather than like, you know, seeing like as a health benefit. But then, you know, at the same time, people have like so many like mistrust with the government. So it makes sense, but it was like a big health problems.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting yeah, no, these are interesting, you know, these are very, very timely things nowadays too, that you know, that mistrust, and the government often does mess up, you know? Doesn't necessarily has a good reputation of not doing harm either, unfortunately. But yeah, that's one of those interesting where we wanted to change, or we can change the behavior in the public, or the body's response to a deficiency very easily by putting iodine into the salt.
And fish, right? If they eat more fish.
Huh?
If they eat more fish.
Well, yeah, we can of course work that way too. But then again, then we're talking about people having the ability to pay for it, right? And so that's the problem. This brings up that interesting discussion when we look about how hormones are released, how the glands work. We're looking at a lot of them are working with the negative feedback system. So that's back to, if let's say the blood sugar works well that way. If the blood sugar is high, we need to create insulin, put insulin in the system, so the sugar in the blood goes into the cells, and the sugar in the blood lowers, and so therefore insulin lowers the blood sugar. And we also then have a different hormone, and that's glucagon, that's elevating the blood sugar in case we don't have enough sugar in the blood for the cells. And so the hormone itself goes onto the cells and brings the sugar into the cells. It doesn't go to the sugar and walks the sugar to the cells and brings it in. It's just the sugar, the insulin opens a door, and then the sugar actually flows in. It's a very interesting concept there, because the sugar changes the molecular structure as soon as it enters the cell, and then through that you create this continuous downgrade movement and this sort of suction event, because the sugar still wants to come in, because it doesn't have sugar on the inside, because it's a molecularly different structure at that point. So you keep that gradient going. So that's kind of interesting too. That's a little, you know, subtle kind of stuff that we can study more in physiology in a different class. But a lot of them are based on this negative positive feedback loop. And then the other one way that we're controlling releases of hormones is by the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is a brain structure that measures a lot of different things. And the hypothalamus talks to the pituitary gland, which is in that cella turcica that we studied when we did the skull. And in there, we release a lot of different hormones that then go to the different body regions and have influence on them, or go to different glands and influence different glands. For example, you have the one we just talked about, the thyroid gland with the iodine, and you have from the thyroid gland you secrete thyroid stimulating. You secrete a thyroid hormone, not thyroid stimulating hormone, thyroid hormone, and the thyroid hormone has an influence on the metabolism in the body. So how do we use ATP? How do we make ATP and stuff like that? How do we utilize the energy in the body? And so this is a very complicated system, because you could either make it too crazy or make it not enough. very quickly. And so the pituitary gland here secretes a hormone that is known as the thyroid stimulating hormone. And when that's in the system, it goes to the thyroid and tells the thyroid to secrete thyroid hormone at that point. So that's a very interesting sort of how you have a cascade effect of that whole thing, how that works. And then the other thing that's even more interesting, the hypothalamus, which is in the brain, which we're going to learn when we do the brain. It's a deep structure inside the brain, is actually in control of the pituitary gland and influences the pituitary gland to either secrete these hormones or not secrete these hormones. Mm. And so they're called thyroid stimulating releasing hormone or thyroid stimulating inhibiting hormone, what comes from here and then talks to the pituitary gland and then tells them to what to do with the thyroid stimulating hormone. Mm. So it's like we can call, they always call like the pituitary gland is sort of the king here or whatever, because it retreats all that. But the real king is the hypothalamus. And then the pituitary gland is shoot, you can't see my hand, can you? The pituitary gland. Can you follow on the screen?
I can see.
You can see the screen. Okay. I will learn how this is gonna work. I will figure it out. Sorry about that, but I need to figure out the pointer.
I see your cursor.
Oh, you see the cursor here? The hand?
Oh no, it was an arrow.
Yeah. Okay. Oh. So if I actually go here,
but maybe you can move your mouse, like we can see it.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I'm not in the big picture on my screen. Let me see. Why is this the view? It's probably my view that's wrong. Gallery, immerse. What's immerse mean? No, I don't want to immerse. Holy cow. That's like we all have different pictures and faces. That's confusing. Okay. Can you see my cursor in my hand now? Or no?
No.
Yeah, okay. I'll need to work on that later. So that's one. Hold on. I need to make sure. Cursor. But anyway, I'm going to keep talking the way I have. I hope it's okay. Is that all right?
Yeah.
All right. So, but basically, what I'm interested in describing is that system that the hypothalamus controls the pituitary, and the pituitary then secretes a whole bunch of hormones. A lot of them go directly to the organs and influence them, but a lot of them go to other glands, and then the glands secrete more hormones or different hormones that then influence the body. Mm. So this system is set up because it's very, very delicate. It's very delicate to control how we utilize the glucose and how the glucose in the body works, and all of that kind of stuff, or how we grow. Things like the growth, that's a big, very, very delicate process. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We have to be proportionate. So we have all these places where we control what's going on. And so that's out of how that system sort of is built up that way. So that's that control when we look at the different ways, either the negative feedback loop or then the hypothalamus pituitary sort of axis, the way we can talk about that. And then from there, we guys basically go to the different hormones and just describe the different hormones. And the first, the first one here is one we described that goes from the pituitary. Well, there's one more thing to the pituitary. We have a posterior and an anterior part to the pituitary. The anterior part is what I just described to you, which is influenced by the hypothalamus, but makes its own hormones that then get secreted into the bloodstream. The posterior pituitary is actually just ends of the hypothalamus, sort of hypothalamus extensions going down and then secreting the hormones directly into the bloodstream from there. And so we have two hormones coming from there. It's called the antidiuretic hormone as well as the oxytocin. And when you look about what they're doing, you can see it right here, the antidiuretic hormone. And that's what I want you to know sort of for when you come to the test, or sort of the first ways of moving around with this stuff or using the stuff is the antidiuretic hormone is the anti-P hormone. So what is the function? It decreases it's antidiuretic. So makes you hold on to the liquid, to the water. And you feel that when that doesn't work, when you drink coffee, for example, you got to go to the bathroom way more afterwards, or drink some beer or something. And that's the same thing. And you have to pee all the time, because what those substances do is they inhibit that hormone from working. And so then you dehydrate the body. And so this hormone has, whenever you look at hormones or things that have to do with how much blood volume is, how much water is let go or kept, you have to think of blood pressure, because you're looking at blood volume, and blood volume has to do with blood pressure. So that's an interesting hormone there. So you go a little deeper and study that a little more in the video. The oxytocin has to do with uterine contractions and in breastfeeding. But it also is sort of known as the cuddly hormone. So that's the one that feels good. That's the connection feeling hormone. So that's kind of a nice one to study a little bit more. And of course, you can always go further on Google or so and study that more. And then we were talking already a little bit about growth. There's a growth hormone that increases cell division and increases size, and it goes very heavily to muscles and bones. So that's where the size of a person is sort of coming from. And then we have, and these are hormones directly secreted by the pituitary, now not by the hypothalamus, directly by the pituitary. Then we have another one called prolactin, and that works on the mammary glands, and in the guys on testosterone. Can go a little more. And then we have a couple of a sex hormone sort of related, a follicle stimulating hormone and a luteinizing hormone. And those have to do with maturing of the gametes. They're called the sex cells, the sperm and the eggs, and all the surrounding structures, to make sure that all works well. And then we already, no, we didn't talk about that. That's another hormone that's secreted by the pituitary. Is very interesting. Is the adrenocorticotropic hormone. And that's a very complicated word. But when you look at the adrenal gland, which we can go, I should maybe have done that. Here, the adrenal, you see the kidneys here on the right top hand. Oh, now I could do that. I just have to learn that. So I got to do that later. But on top of the kidney, you see this adrenal gland sitting there. And when you cut an adrenal gland in half, you're going to see an outside shell and an inside pulpy type of structure. Well, it's not, maybe not pulpy, but it's a different consistency a little bit. And the outside, you can see that on the picture on the bottom left. And an outside shell is known as a cortex, and an inside sort of structure is known as a medulla when we look at many of the organs, but particularly here at this example in the adrenal gland. And so we have hormones that go right to the cortex, the outside shell, and they're known as the adrenocorticotropic hormones, and then influence what's going on in the outside shell of the cortex. And the outside shell of the cortex secretes a few hormones, but one of them that is really, really popular that we understand is the stress hormone, cortisol, that we want to study a little bit more when we get to that. So it influences the amount of cortisol that we have in the body. And cortisol is a stress hormone for long-term stress. But what it does, so it increases the sugar in the system to make sure we have enough energy, but it decreases the inflammatory response. And it also decreases the immune response if we're exposed too much to it. So that's kind of like, if you're too stressed, you're going to get sickle lesion. That's kind of part with the cortisol. But also we know the cortisol, when we look at medicine and look at injections for joints and muscles, sometimes that for pain or nerve stuff, cortisone. If we give cortisone, then if we give cortisone, that's the synthetic cortisol. So we have to inflammatory decrease, which is what we desire, but we also have other things like the immune system gets a little bit weaker and stuff. So it's one of those things that it's a great medicine, but we want to be careful how we use it, because we're actually synthetically influencing, at almost on a hormonal level type stuff. So that's always a little bit tricky as far as I'm concerned. These things are very delicate. So that's kind of an interesting one there from that respect. And so that covers then a little bit the adrenal gland, you know, sort of talking about it. Then when you go through it, you get more of that. And then the thyroid, we already extensively talked. And then the pineal gland, now we go to individual glands. Now we're moving away from the anti-pituitary. We have multiple different glands. Now we're talking about what they're doing. A few of them I already mentioned, but these are a few more. The pineal gland has to do with melatonin. You know about melatonin when you can't go to sleep and you can take melatonin. That's you're actually taking that hormone. That's why melatonin is like you don't want to take too much or too long of it.
What does it do to your nerve system if you take too much?
Well, one of the things that we want to be considerate about taking too much of a substance as that's a hormone is the body will think, oh, I don't have to make it anymore.
Oh.
And then the body stops making it. And then when you stop taking the synthetic form, what am I going to do with my going to sleep feelings? You know, to me, the melatonin is kind of like, oh, I'm feeling tired now. Let me lay down and sleep. And to me, that happens about 7:30 at night. And so ideally, I would go to sleep then. And that would be, I kind of go, but very often, you know, there's a movie going on or something, and we tell our, or studies, of course, when we're students, or social, we don't want to, or, you know, some people don't have it that early, so they're lucky. But then we push through that melatonin spike. And then when we do that, we gotta, then maybe we gotta take a melatonin externally, but also we kind of messing with that system. You know, if we're really in tune with nature, we're going to bed when we're having a spike in melatonin and feeling that sleepy. And then that's, you know, but yeah, you don't want to take it synthetically too long because the body adapts to it.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah.
And so to me, that's a sort of a fundamental thing with all the things like, you know, that's where it's like, it's a very, very with this Ozempic a little bit because it's a hormone thing. And I don't know if the body gets used to it and then you stop taking it. And what's the whiplash? You know, what's the backlash? Not the whiplash, the backlash from it. So those are questions that come up when you talk about this stuff. That's very, very good question. So melatonin is that. Melatonin is also to do with the biological clock. So it has, in children, it's high, so it inhibits the sexual dysfunction. Or the sexual development, not dysfunction, development. It's also antioxidant, so it's good stuff. Yeah, and we're learning a lot of things.
And it's interesting because like I know some people taking like, you know, even my dad takes melatonin, so like it's just like interesting to like correlate that with this class. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes it more relevant.
Yeah, no, well, it's important because you have so many choices of things you want to learn. I mean, in any class, I feel, but what's the relevance to me, and how does it help me think about the world? How, you know, it's not just data that's like standalone data,
right?
You know, it's like once you know a little bit about how the hormone things work, you can start to think about the hormone things a little differently. You know, and go like, oh yeah, maybe if it's medicine based, for example, you know, maybe. So that's how it helps me build like a framework of knowledge and the application to it.
Thank you.
So thyroid, we talked a little bit. This is just more about it, how it makes it, and wherever the iodine comes in. And then the thyroid gland is interesting. The thyroid is like this in the front here. In the back of the thyroid gland, you have little glands called parathyroid gland. You see that in the top right picture. And then inside the thyroid gland itself, you also have cells that correlate together with the parathyroid glands. And those together work on the calcium level in the blood. So how high is your calcium level in the blood? And the calcium is kind of a similar thing like the glucose thing, if you think about it, how it works. If it's too high, you secrete wait a minute. If it's too high, calcium, the way I remember it, calcitonin, which is the top left one, calcitonin tones the blood calcium level down. So that's how it tones it down. That's how I remember it. So if you have too much calcium in the blood, you want to have calcitonin to tell the bones and tell the GI tract and tell the urine to get rid of it. And then the parathyroid gland increases the blood calcium level if the blood calcium level is a little bit lower than the range. We have a little range of how we want it in there. And the reason for that is because calcium is very important for many body functions.
Right.
You need to have it at a really, I mean, if you don't have calcium, you have a problem with muscle contraction, you have a problem with release of the chemicals in the nervous system, you have a whole bunch of weird problems that are kind of fatal. So you really need that calcium proper. They had a problem when they first had people with goiters, big glands. They removed the gland, you know, it's too big. Let's take it out. It's a tumor. Thinking, you know, it's like, oh my God. The problem is they took away these little dots in the back here, these little things there on the top right, these parathyroid glands, and these people died. Then they realized, well, that's probably not a good idea.
So it's better to leave it there than the tumor?
Well, the goiter is not a tumor. You had the goiter because the gland got big.
Okay.
Lack of iodine, right? So the gland is like overproducing thyroid hormone because it is lacking the iodine that makes it functional. So you're making all this non-functioning thyroid hormone, and the body's like, I need more. I need real stuff, and so it doesn't understand that. So that's.
Does that come like with age or?
You know, that's a good question. I think it's more a genetic thing. I have to read up on it. I think because it's more young people, but I don't think these people necessarily get that old.
Yeah, I remember like my grandma, she used to have that problem, and the older that she get, the more like trouble that she was having. And she wanted like to have a surgery, and the doctor said, you know, like she was like too old to the surgery. So yeah, she didn't do it, but she died when she got like very 98, 99.
Yeah, so she got very old.
Yeah, she got like very old. When she died, she was 98.
You know, it could be that there is a tendency she might not have had it as a young person, and because that you know a lot of our body systems do, you know, slow down, and then we don't quite, you know, we can take genetic markers and learn about more and more which ones are influencing us how, and then can take measures earlier on in life if we figure that out. But you know, a lot of these things as we get that old, they just accumulate, and then and you know, that was probably a good call. I mean, it really depends on surgery can be very hard when we're very old.
Yeah.
Especially if they have to put you under, then that can be a big influence on the brain capacity, and we have to be very gentle to. That's another one of those, you know, pajamas, the modern medicine. You know, we have sometimes questioning because they might take us. I read some articles. They might really give you heavy duty medication to sedate you for surgery, but then it influences your cognitive function. When you're like post 65, 70, or depends on the person probably, you know. Anywho, so that's kind of cool stuff. Glad you guys are talking to me. And then we briefly talked about the adrenal gland. The interesting thing with the adrenal gland is we got that cortex there on the bottom right next to me that you see all these like substances that secreted from there. And one of them we talked about is the cortisol. We also have testosterone coming from there. That's testosterone that's both in the men and the women as well. Most testosterone in the guys also comes from the testes, which is the name from there. But then also we have on the inside in that medulla, we have that pulpy structure type. No, don't say pulpy structure. It just sounds good because it's not really what's descriptive of it. But in there we secrete adrenaline. We secrete the epinephrine, which is what adrenaline is, epinephrine and norepinephrine, and that's the short-term stress hormone. So when we talk back to swerving out of the freeway, we have a swerving out moment. That's the nervous system. And then we have a slower response of the jitters that show up to the alert and all that, the preparation for more action. Like you're thinking, you don't think in freeway, that's a modern time. You're thinking a lion's in the corner wanting to run at you. You know, that's sort of that, oh my Lord. And then the adrenaline makes sure you could do that. When it gets secreted into the system. I mean, you have all that energy and have the alertness. So it has all these interesting. We do that when we talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. But that's sort of the short term, and then the cortisol that we talked previously about is then the long-term stress hormone. So you want to have the short term work really well because you want to be able to be reactive. You don't want to be abused. And with doing that, you're of abusing the system over time. It adapts and it's a toll on the organ because you do have a connection between these systems and then the physical body. And so that's why people develop high blood pressure and things like that. I mean, it's not the only reason, but that's one reason. That's why it's important to do a little meditation here and there and take some deep breaths during the day. So that's why that's important. That pancreas, we kind of talked about. That's that blood sugar thing. We have insulin brings the blood sugar into the cells, and glucagon releases it from cells. You have certain cells like the liver, for example, they can store glucose. Very, very few structures can store glucose, but the ones that can, we can secrete glucose from those structures. We can also make glucose from different structures like fat and protein. So because we need glucose, to kind of survive. And then lastly, we had the gonads. We don't need to go. We had in the gonads, we have multiple testosterone, we have estrogen that we generate there, and these have multiple functions, as you can see. They're not just helping with the production of the gametes of the sex cells and their development, but they're also having multiple different other things, like the estrogen can help the bone, et cetera, and the brain and so forth. So it's interesting to read up on that. You don't need to know all those details for the test. That's why you go back when you do test stuff, you go to the test 3 review and you look up what we want from there. That makes sense? Hello.
Yep.
Good.
Yes,
then
sorry, I was on mute. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying, I'm a little scrambly here. But the next thing we have was the skin. The skin's very simple. We don't have to worry about the skin too heavily. Where is my slideshow here? Come on, people. Come on. Now let's see if I can add that. Look at that. I think I can share that. Oh, shoot. Remove. There we go. You see my skin?
Mm-hmm.
Ha! So that's cool. That translates straight over from that to the Zoom. So that's good. Next time I'll have a pointer. Haha. All right. So if we're looking at the skin, we don't really have to go too far. The skin is the biggest organ in the body. It's the integumentary system, it's called. When we do technical terminology. It has a top layer, and the top layer is basically dead cells. That we can reach back to the epithelial cells. This is our good example of squamous, stratified squamous epithelial cells, the fried eggs with layers. And then underneath it, we have the thing called the dermis. Those are structures like the blood vessels that come to it, the nerve endings and things like that. Because remember, an epithelial cells are it's just a lot of cells next to each other and layered on top of one another. And so then the next thing is in here is we go into the function of the epidermis. The function of the skin, on what it is. No, wait a minute. We're not going into the function here. We're going into the function later. That's when we go next into what I first thought. We go into the different layers of the skin, of the epidermis on top. And so you just basically give names to things, to cells that first get made and then accumulate this thing called keratin, which is the protein that makes it leathery. So now this is what you're thinking is leather. You're thinking leather, our own skin leather, but then it dries out, right? And as it dries out, it gets just more and more dehydrated cells with less fluid in it. But it's got this keratin in it that makes it stiff and tight and taut and waterproof and all of that stuff. And so the labeling is sort of called a layer, means stratum, and then basal is the basic, and the spinosum is because you accumulate those granules, or the cells dry out a little, they become more spiny. That's what it is. And then the granulosum is the word for, you can see the granules. Those are the little dots that appear. And then in some skins, if you think about your palms and your feet and the hands and the sole of the feet, they are a little bit different than the rest of the skin. And so that there you have a different layer. You have one layer called lucidum, and that's sort of an in-between layer. And then after that, you basically have flaky dead cells on all skin levels. And so if you bump into something, if you scratch yourself, cells just fall off. And you don't scratch yourself and you start bleeding. It's kind of an interesting thing. You're not scratching into something that wants to not be hurt and hold on to it. No, you just give off a few cells and let go of it. And then that is an interesting way of dealing with abrasion or with friction kind of thing. So that's what that does. So that's sort of the overview of that. And then, of course, anatomy wants to name everything. So it goes into these names. But if you keep the overview in your head, then, that's kind of good. And so then we have to talk. So that's the main structure of this epidermis, this top layer, and then we talk about the cells of the epidermis, this area. Most of them are these keratinocytes, which are the ones who make that granule, that keratin, that leather protein. I call it the leather protein. Make it some descriptive that makes us understand it. And then we also have Merkel cells, and late, we had Angela Merkel in Germany, but not anymore, but I could call it that before. But those are sensory cells. We have a few other cells there that we need to talk about. We have melanocytes. Those are making the pigment. The skin color comes from those. And those are actually cells that help us protect against UV rays. So that's pretty interesting. And then we have long john cells. Langerhans in German means long johns. Some of these words come from Germany. That was one of sort of the influencing place when these things were developed originally. And those are actually immune cells. So this is now an example where we have macrophages, which were monocytes in the cells. When we did the immune cells, they're the monocytes, and they escape the blood system, go into the tissues and become the individual cells in the tissues. And then they call them macrophages. And macro means big eaters. Phage means eating. Macro means big. So they eat big stuff. So they keep the stuff clean. They make sure there's no junk coming in. And then as junk shows up and we have a cut in the skin and whatever we don't want, we send the neutrophils there to clean it up, and then we create the pus, and that's the dead neutrophils. But the ones who are residing in the tissues, for the most part, are the macrophages, and in the skin we call them Langerhans cells, or I call, if you want to say long johns, we're fine. Kind of, we gotta figure out how to remember these kind of things. It's like, who came up with these names? I was terrified having to study anatomy in chiropractic school. I thought it's gonna give me the axe and kick me out. That's why I was really surprised I liked it so much.
It's for me, like, English as a second language, I find it hard too. So it's interesting that like you have some similar backgrounds, and like here you are teaching us about this.
Well, the reason why I teach it so I understand it, because it slows me down to have to read it slow. I mean, it has a lot of that to do with that, because it is hard stuff. And I learned the English through anatomy because I came to study massage school. Yeah. Massage, and so the first, you got to study anatomy and this sort of stuff. And so, but go ahead.
No, I said I think we're all in the same boat.
Right.
But it again, then what's the relevance? You got to question when a class like an anatomy class is too much reading, because it's really about the body, and you got to give these names to it. And the more we understand where the name comes from, to me at least, it helps me understand it better.
Yeah.
So then when we go away from the epidermis, the top layer, we go into the dermis, and there we have a layer called the papillary layer. And that's like, when you think about, you could pull on that skin and it doesn't tear off. And part of the reason is right underneath the epidermis, we have these pegs sticking up from underneath. But what that does, it makes the epidermis go up and down, make valleys and make dents and have mountains. And that increases the surface area. And increased surface area gives us more space where we can anchor things to one another. And so that's why the skin doesn't tear. That's one reason. And that's why we have this papillary layer of that underneath layer, that dermis. And papilla means peg, basically. That's what that really means. And the other thing is, which is great, is we can actually bring nutrients closer into the epidermis, sort of, when we do that, when we go up and down, and also nerve fibers as well, because we only, in an epithelial cell structure, we don't really have the nutrients coming in. We have to have them through diffusion. We don't have blood vessels going in. We just have cells. So that's another thing we can do. And then underneath that, we have a reticular, they call it reticular layer. That's just an anchoring layer of the dermis to the underneath structure, which is the basically the subcutaneous fat layer. And then look at, here we get to the functions. So see, this is where I try to have some fun with the pictures. So protection, we have immune function. The skin lets the stuff not come in. So that's actually one of the big, if you think about it, it's the biggest immune function. I mean, I was surprised when I went swimming and I had my finger hair infected and I was working 6-7 hours on patients and the stuff in my hands was all mushy. And I got a staph infection from that because there was a little hole in my skin and my hand blew up and I had to go. And if I wouldn't have done anything, I would have had a fifth of a chance to be dead in 30 days. I was like, holy shit, thank God for antibiotics. Thank God I wasn't born before 1930. You know, I mean, that really brings it home. I mean, when you're sitting in the ER, you know, it's like you go, oh my God. And that all I did is go swimming with my grandkid. But so that's that skin. That's the skin. It's important to take good care of that thing. That made me realize that too. And that is an immune function that we often forget. And then the other thing is temperature. The more, you know, if we bring the blood close to the surface of the skin, we radiate off heat. So we can regulate temperature that way. If we sweat, we bring off, water is a very high heat capacity, can hold a lot of heat. So if we sweat, that heat goes outside of the cell and we can get rid of it. So that's pretty neat too. And then what, water balance, obviously that's also, sweating brings out, you know, the salt. If you ever, you know, your dog likes your licking up because he likes your sweat. He likes the salt in the skin, sweat. So that's the electrolyte. So sometimes, you know, when you're really outside running around, just drinking plain water might not be enough. Maybe that's when you want to take one of those emergencies or those hydration electrolyte things, because you're bringing back these. I actually have some Pedialyte, you know, the things for athletes, because when I work at the office and it's a hot day, I need to replenish sometimes these electrolytes to feel more energetic again. So keep that in mind. That's, you know, water balance is important. And then we have sensation. Obviously, we feel all through the skin, and with touch type stuff, deep and superficial touch. So also, we need to differentiate between that. I mean, that comes in the nurturing when we look at the heavy blankets, for example, because they stimulate the deep touch sensors and not the superficial touch sensors. Also temperature, of course, and we have pain in there. You know, pain is interesting. Pain is a danger signal. It's nociception. So when we have pain, it actually means pay attention to this. It's not like get rid of this. So, I mean, figure out how to get rid of it, but usually it's not an aspirin. I mean, the aspirin may be short term, but if it comes back, you know, that having a headache, we often joke in chiro school, it's like having a headache is not a lack of ibuprofen in your system. Most, you know, it's, and so if you have a headache, unless you have ibuprofen or aspirin in your system, then you got to do something different about that, not take the drugs the whole time. After a while, those drugs take a toll on the system. Anyway, that's just a little of that stuff. But then the other thing is interesting is communication. You know, the skin also has a lot to do with communication. When you look at people's face, it tells you a lot of what's going on. The color of the face, for example, they're blushing. If they're pale, you can read a lot. Fundamental reading, you know, like how are they doing? And then we have a few skin appendages. And sorry, I'm going over a little bit, but I'm almost done, I think. Well, I have one more chapter, but we're going to skip on that. We can do that next week. We have skin appendages. We have hair. We have glands. We have nails. Let's just brief on that. And then that's pretty much all I think on that chapter that I want to say in that respect. Oh, look at that. Share screen, remove that. And then I can get myself bigger. Woo. Look, I can turn. Did you see that? Woo. Oh my God. I got this program. I got one of my students a couple semesters ago. He was an arts director before at a really big firm, and he told me, you gotta do more than just be a little Zoom thing in a corner.
Right, it's very cool.
Let's try it out. But having said that, that's we also have still the nervous chapter, the fundamental nervous system. But let's touch on that next week, and you guys do the first round on that yourself. Because I think that's a good one to have sort of multiple ways, multiple go-arounds. We're talking there about, the neuron, the small stuff, but also how the nerve impulse functions. And so if you have any questions coming up while you're going through that chapter and you want to talk offline, shoot me a text, and I'm happy to put in a session, especially, now that we don't go to the classroom. We'll just online, we'll do a study group. I'll shoot out a text and say, hey, who wants to have an extra half hour on this? But if you initiate that from anybody, even recording, then that's great, because I don't want to be overkill in case things are already pretty clear. Then we're okay with that. But with that brings us to the rest of the class let me see how I can manipulate this for this week, and that's just this finishing up here. Hold on. Now, how the heck am I gonna work that? Hold on. All right, let's see. Ha! Now I can. All right, so wait, we did this, we did week 10. We talked about the pathology stuff, the presentation. So I want to make sure. Can you see that cursor moving?
Yeah.
Ha! Yeah, we're seeing it.
What I can do. So anyway, we talked about the pathology stuff on your end, so that if it's okay with you, I'll leave that into recording, because everybody else needs to get on the board too with that. Why is this not? Oh, fade. That's the fade. There you go. Now I'm not faded. And then that's for week 10, and then week 11 is this week, and the only thing we didn't talk about really is the nervous system fundamentals. So if you listen to this video, or if you just were part of this class now, you go through it again, you should be pretty all right to get started with these questions, fairly quickly. And then this week is pretty much, that's it. There's no labeling or coloring on this. So I want you guys to spend some time this week on the presentation stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good.
Good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ann.
Have a good one.
Thank you.